Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's always a pleasure to speak in this House on a debate on the NHS and to recognise the million staff who are very hard-working and try to do their best for the patients that we all have as our constituents. I also welcome the fact that the Shadow Secretary of State is still in his place, and I recognise that the NHS is important to him, but I would put across to him very strongly. He accuses this side of the House as being complacent. I think that's far from the truth, and I think the evidence of our nearly 4 years in government shows that is not the case. He will rightly be proud, as will members from the other side, of increasing spending during 13 years. But I think that he risks confusing increasing spending with and just putting in more money is automatically the only way to help patients. And I think from my concern would be that actually that led to a complacent attitude under Labour, that simply by putting more money everything would get solved. In fact, I think they missed the opportunity to do significant reforms, and instead things like the Care and Quality Commission, I believe, have been truly strengthened, especially within the last 18 months. And indeed, there's no concern about opening the lid on the problems that we know exist in parts of our NHS. We know that from our casework that each of us receives. And indeed, many of us bring individual examples to this House today. And that's why I'm proud that we've done more to strengthen the CQC with an independent inspector of hospitals. At time, I've criticised the CQC for being too timid in not being prepared to be more public about its concerns and going in. But the short notice inspections are really important in order to make sure that patients do feel confident that when they go for treatment, that they will get excellent treatment, which they largely do, but also get the care that they deserve when they are under the custodianship of the NHS. I don't see that in any way that this side of the House is trying to be complacent. And I would give another example of where I think an element of complacency leapt in by suggesting targets were the right thing. Yeah. Now, we all know that if you don't measure something, often doesn't get done. Recognise that. But I think one of the issues, and I'm going to refer specifically now to the issues about ambulance services, is that the targets of having regional targets of 98% of patients being 75% of patients being covered within 8 minutes of red one calls. I think that may well have been met in most of the country, but actually it didn't really show what was happening on the ground. And I think it's certainly thanks to people like my honourable friend, the member for North Norfolk, my other honourable friend who's a health minister from Central Suffolk and North Ipswich. I know that they've been vocal for a long time in pressing the case on ensuring that it's not just about hitting a regional target, but about focusing on individual patients. And my concern is that the complacency that came in, as long as we were hitting our regional target, then everything was fine, when we knew as MPs that everything was certainly not fine. And what we saw in the east of England was that resources were focused on main urban centres, and frankly, if you were out in the countryside, not even the countryside so much, even just a smaller town or a smaller village, that you were frankly almost ignored, because if you didn't help the centre hit their regional target, then if you'd broken your hip, it almost didn't matter that you were lying on the floor for 4 hours waiting for somebody to come, because it was not a life-threatening injury. And I think one of the things that concerns me, and I note the honourable member for Warrington North starts to refer to the North West Ambulance Service. She's no longer in her place, but one of the things that struck me was that we didn't wait for the centre to particularly act on it. I'm very proud that members of Parliament from across the east of England, and I also particularly draw upon my honourable friend from Whittam, we worked together to hold our ambulance service to account. We worked together, and in fact the outcome of that is that we managed to get the entire board replaced. This is not something that was easy to do. This was very difficult to do, especially when at times you are accused of attacking the NHS and undermining it, when actually, far from showing complacency, individual members of Parliament working together to make sure that patients were what came first, not some artificial target that actually was bad for patients. Now, I actually wanted to say thank you to the honourable member for Leicester West, who's sadly no longer in her place on the front bench, because she was the person who put me in contact with Anthony Marsh. Now, Anthony Marsh is the Chief Executive of the West Midlands Ambulance Service, and thanks to action by this government, he is now the Chief Executive of the East of England Ambulance Service. Now, what I would say is that he has been able to already in his very short tenure bring a new sense of urgency, a recognition that the pipeline of staff coming through is not quick enough, and is doing something about it. And I have confidence that when we meet him next week, we'll be able to understand even further the plans that he has. But again, going back to saying, one of the reasons, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was accused of go-vitus earlier, is because it really frustrates me when we get accused of complacency, when actually members of Parliament are working hard to help their constituents. So far from the complacency, the consistent way we've approached this, I would recommend, frankly, to members of Parliament from other parts of the country, instead of just waiting for some person in Whitehall to be acting on the issues, instead of mocking those MPs who say they are working hard to press the case and to hold their local board to account, then get on and do it, and not just wait for others to do so. But I will give credit to NHS England. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, at times it felt like pushing them through treacle to recognise the real problem that we were facing for our patients, but for our constituents. But I would say that finally they have also got the message, and together we are actually, I believe, starting to turn around the situation. Now, what also has been referred to is aspects of ambulance hospital provision. Now, I don't wish to go on for too much further, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I think it's important that everyone who wants to have their say can. In fact, I'm kind of putting in a bit of a bid for an adjournment debate, if possible, in Westminster Hall about NHS funding and the elderly population. Well, if you don't ask, you don't get. But I would just say to honourable members, I do listen to my patients in my area these are the people who have 200-mile round trips to get to the specialist hospitals. This is where we are concerned about the fact that stroke reconfiguration is potentially being done, which would make it physically impossible for patients to be seen within 60 minutes of the 999 call being made. And as a consequence of that, my honourable friend on the front bench will know that we were pressing the case to have more funding given to areas of rural sparsity, to recognise that geography does matter when you're trying to deal with situations like that. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I recognise, as I say, that the other side, the members from the other side, do feel strongly about the NHS, but so do members on this side. It is something that is universal, just as we continue to support the NHS. There is no way that we can ever be accused of complacency. The reality is that we are dealing with the issues. We're not putting a lid. We have had the Francis inquiry. We continue to work with many of its recommendations. And I believe that in that case, I'm very happy to support the government's amendment today.